too.
When you look into Ayn Rand's political views, you can trace how she got to her conclusions back to her philosophy of objectivism. Her disdain for altruism is one of the biggest reasons as to why she believes that anything dealing with collectivism is inherently evil. Before I dive into her political philosophy, though, I think this is a good point to introduce her background. She was born in St. Petersburg, Russia in 1905 to a middle-class Russian Jewish family. Her parents owned a successful pharmacy until the October Revolution, where it was confiscated. During the February Revolution of 1917, Ayn Rand supported Alexander Kerensky, who was a part of a political party known as the Trudovskiks, a socialist democracy party. The February Revolution was the event that led to the abdication of the final emperor of Russia, Tsar Nicholas II. This would be the end of monarchy and the beginning of a new democratic form of government. This was called the Russian Provisional Government. This government was based upon the idea of bottom-up rule. The government itself had no real authority and favored devolution of power to decentralized organizations. Sound familiar? States' rights, local rule. After its formation, a public announcement was made that outlined full and immediate amnesty on all issues political and religious, including terrorist acts, military uprisings, and agrarian crimes. Freedom of word, press, unions, assemblies, and strikes with spread of political freedoms to military servicemen within the restrictions allowed by the military technical conditions. Abolition of all hereditary, religious, and national class restrictions. Immediate preparations for the convocation on basis of universal, equal, secret, and direct vote for the Constituent Assembly, which will determine the form of government and the Constitution. Replacement of the police with a public militia and its elected chairmanship subordinated to the local authorities. Elections to the authorities of local self-government on the basis of universal, direct, equal, and secret vote. Non-disarmament and non-withdrawal out of Petrograd, the military units participating in the revolution movement. Under preservation of strict discipline and ranks and performing a military service, elimination of all restrictions for soldiers and the use of public rights granted to all other citizens. During this time period, much of the wealth was still held in the hands of a few. They literally just revolted against a monarchy where the wealth was held by the upper classes of society. So the ideas of socialism and communism really resonated with the lower classes. During the Russian Empire, 80% of the population were peasants in an economy solely based on heavy mining. These peasants were given land to sustain themselves, but also high rents and taxes were levied on them. This peasant class contributed the most of any class to the economy. The concepts of socialism and communism were not that far of a stretch since they already had nothing and were paying for much of the government to begin with. The ideas of class were already ingrained into their society. Next comes the October Revolution, fueled by miners who had felt that the government was transitioning too slowly. They wanted to see the outcomes of their ideas as soon as possible. Under this new party, controlled by the Bolsheviks, all private property was nationalized by the government and redistributed to the peasants. All Russian banks were nationalized, private bank accounts were expropriated. The properties of the church, including bank accounts, were expropriated. All foreign debts were repudiated. Control of all the factories was given to the Soviets. Wages were fixed at higher rates than during the war, and a shorter 8-hour working day was introduced. After all was said and done, Rand enrolled into the Petrograd University and majored in history. It was here that she was introduced to many of the ideas that influenced her ideology. Aristotle being the one philosopher that she respected. She studied Friedrich Nietzsche, which would explain her idea perfect man being similar to this Superman. Fyodor Dostoevsky, they have similar styles in which they explain their philosophy through narratives. Victor Hugo, Edmund Rostand, and Friedrich Schiller However, Rand was considered a part of the bourgeois and was purged from the university before graduating. She was eventually allowed to finish her degree. However, she then obtained a visa to visit relatives in America and eventually became a permanent citizen. I include her background here because I feel it is relevant to understanding how she came to her ideas about collectivism. She lived through a time in which a monarchy was dissolved and the peasant class had a lot of resentment up against the upper nobility. The majority of Russia was still incredibly poor, and the citizens wanted rapid change into this democratic communist utopia. Seeing her family lose their business and livelihood could have possibly pushed her towards her anti-altruistic collective views. Their livelihood was taken in the name of the greater good. Also, her treatment while attending college could have added some fuel to that fire. So what does Ayn Rand believe when it comes to government?
Government's proper function is only to protect your rights, and that means to protect men from those who initiate force. So the government protects the peace, internal peace, that means the policemen. The government runs the army and navy, protection from outside forces, and law court, so that citizens who disagree can settle their disputes peacefully. That's the only functions of government.
She believes that government is only meant to protect citizens from internal and outside threats of violence. That if one initiates violence against another, then the government is justified to retaliate against the individual who started it. A basic self-defense in which citizens gain protection of the government as if the government was an extension of their body. This is the only instance where Rand ever considers the collective being justified. To retaliate against violence and to provide a system of justice through courts to resolve disagreements peacefully. This idea can also be seen with her views on taxation. Because taxation can be upheld through the force of violence, in her eyes, the government isn't justified to use violence first. This would be like attacking yourself. The government can only react to violence, not initiate it. One can voluntarily contribute to taxation if they wish, and to her that is fine. But add the coercion through violence, then you have crossed the line. Beyond that, Rand also advocates that capitalism should be the underpinning of government. Yes, I know that capitalism is an economic theory, but Ayn Rand doesn't discern the two. In her world, there are only two options: capitalism or collectivism.
Or statism, which holds that man's life and work belong to the state, to society, to the group, the gang, the race, the nation, and that the state may dispose of him in any way it pleases for the sake of whatever it deems to be its own tribal collective good. From her start, America was torn by the clash of her political system with the altruist morality. Capitalism and altruism are incompatible. They cannot coexist in the same man or in the same society. Today, the conflict has reached its ultimate climax.
Has been tearing Western civilization, and which has reached its ultimate climax in our age, is the conflict between capitalism and the altruist morality. Capitalism and altruism are philosophical opposites. They cannot coexist in the same man or in the same society.
The morality of altruism comes back to her idea of politics. It is altruism that leads to collectivism, which leads to the value of the individual to be lost to that of the collective. The individual is only as valuable as what it can provide to the greater good. She hated community so much she adopted the slogan, "Better see the Reds dead," to the common, "Better dead than red."
The choice is clear-cut. Either a new morality of rational self-interest, with its consequences of freedom, justice, progress, and man's happiness on earth, or the primordial morality of altruism, with its consequences of slavery, brute force, stagnant terror, and sacrificial furnaces.
Here, Rand sets up her dichotomy of capitalism, being rational self-interest, versus collectivism, being the sacrificial individual, or sacrificial furnaces. Obviously, she believes that nothing but positives are attributed to capitalism, while collectivism leads to the worst possible scenario. If you watch my video about her religious views, you can see here how it coincides with her political beliefs. Jesus was an individual that was sacrificed for the collective. The perfect man was sacrificed so that all those who did not deserve value gained it on the work of an individual.
You may observe the practical results of altruism and statism all around us in today's world, such as the slave labor camps of Soviet Russia, where 21 million political prisoners work on the construction of government projects and die of planned malnutrition, human life being cheaper than food, or the gas chambers and mass slaughter of Nazi Germany, or the terror and starvation of Red China, or the hysteria of Cuba, where the government offers men for sale, or the wall of East Berlin, where human beings leap from roofs or crawl through sewers in order to escape, while guards shoot at fleeing children. Observe these atrocities, then ask yourself whether any of it would be possible if man had not accepted the idea that man is a sacrificial animal to be immolated for the sake of the public good.
Ideas I held long before in realizing how evil the opposite of individualism really is.
Collectivism. How does your philosophy translate itself into the world of politics? Now, one of the principal achievements of this country in the past 20 years particularly, I think most people agree, is the gradual growth of social protective legislation based on the principle that we are our brother's keepers. How do you feel about the political trends of the United States, the Western world?
The way everybody feels, except more consciously. I feel that it is terrible, that you see destruction all around you, and that you are moving toward disaster until and unless all those welfare state conceptions have been reversed and rejected. It is precisely these trends which are bringing the world to disaster, because we are now moving towards complete collectivism or socialism, a system under which everybody is enslaved to everybody. And we are moving that way only because of our altruist morality.
Yes, but
To be more specific, she believes in laissez-faire capitalism.
about taxes,
Yes, I am.
principally. And you believe that there should be no right by the government to tax. You believe that there should be no such thing as welfare legislation, unemployment compensation, regulation during times of stress, certain kinds of rent controls and things like that.
That's right. I'm opposed to all forms of control. I am for an absolute, laissez-faire, free, unregulated economy. Let me put it briefly. I'm for the separation of state and economics, just as we had separation of state and church, which led to peaceful coexistence among different religions after a period of religious wars. So the same applies to economics. If you separate the government from economics, if you do not regulate production and trade, you will have peaceful cooperation and harmony and justice among men.
Capitalism requires that man be guided by a principle which is the antithesis of altruism, the principle of justice. They still lack the courage to realize that if justice, progress, abundance, peace, safety, and goodwill are their social goals, then capitalism is the ideal to live, work, and fight for.
Rand equates capitalism with the idea of justice from the individual standpoint. When asked about charity, she said that it's okay to help a fellow man if they had come upon hard times no fault of their own or through injustice. It's when you help someone who came upon hard times of their own actions that she's against it. It would interfere with the balance of justice. This is why altruism is not justice. Justice would be considered reaping all the rewards of the work you put forth. She also doesn't like the idea of government mixing with the economy because in her view, the government has allowed some businessmen to rely on its power to obtain and hold their wealth. They didn't earn it through their own sheer will.
Capitalism does not tell men to suffer, but to pursue enjoyment and achievement here on earth. Capitalism does not tell men to serve and sacrifice, but to produce and profit. Capitalism does not preach passivity, humility, resignation, but independence, self-confidence, self-reliance. And above all, capitalism does not permit anyone to expect or demand, to give or to take the unearned.
This is another idea that she has probably adopted from her dislike of religion, the idea that one must suffer. Suffering is taught in Christianity as a way to accept your current situation in order to understand that heaven will be much better. Verses such as, quote, "For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him." End quote. Philippians 1:29, or, quote, "For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." End quote. 2 Corinthians 4:17. To Rand, there is no heaven, and there is no reason to suffer. We should try and make heaven on earth by doing what is rationally best for the individual. Rand believes in a form of natural rights. These rights are basically tied to whatever is necessary for survival. Quote, "The right to life means the freedom to take all actions required by the nature of a rational being for the support, the furtherance, the fulfillment, and the enjoyment of his own life. Such is the meaning of the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." End quote. The right to liberty is the right to act, including to write and speak, on one's own judgment. The right to the pursuit of happiness is the right to pursue goals for one's own fulfillment. The right to property is the right to gain, to keep, to use, and to dispose of material values. In the most basic sense, government only exists to protect individuals from aggressors. It cannot force anyone to become educated, rich, and healthy, or provide for the public good. Any concept that detracts from the individual being able to act in their own self-interest is unjustified. Laissez-faire capitalism is the bedrock of any free society. Regulations cause corrupt societies. Individuals need self-esteem brought through the accomplishment of their own reason, or they fall prey to collectivist ideologies that value humans as disposable. This is her politics in a nutshell. Hopefully you've enjoyed this, and subscribe and comment below. Don't forget to hit the like or dislike button either. Stay tuned because my next video will be my opinions about her philosophy and its pitfalls. I also offer a solution to the prisoner's dilemma proposed in the first video.